All righty. Kate's a tree steward and master gardener and a member of the Forestry Natural Resources Commission here in Arlington. Kate's also the coordinator for the Bon Air Sunny and Shady Demonstration Gardens and works with Eco Action Arlington on the Tree Canopy Fund program. We're looking forward to your talk, Kate. Thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me. Um, this talk is on right tree, right place. I understand that you have had different lectures already about soil testing and, all of the different things that you can do in selecting trees for certain areas. This is more the human side of right tree, right place. And to just kind of really just to get you started in thinking about some of these issues and in how you talk to the public about it. Please just jump in if you have questions. And of course, we'll have questions at the end as well. I hope everybody got my little handout. It's really just there. At the end, I showed you some different scenarios, and we spend a couple minutes talking about what tree we might actually suggest to these homeowners. So let's get started here. I'm telling you right now that I use a lot of my vacation photos in these things because I find that when I'm on vacation and looking at trees and comparing what happens in other places to what's going on in Arlington, I have to say, in some cases, I am just delighted with what I find elsewhere, but in a lot of cases, I am just shaking my head and thinking, we're not doing all that bad some of this stuff. So I think that the right tree, right place is one of the most important things, because if trees are not planted in a place that is giving them what they need to grow and to thrive, or if it has just so many negatives about it that the tree is just going to be struggling from the get-go, then we're never going to have big, happy, healthy trees. So this is a really, really important thing to think about. So as I told you, why is this important? Well, for a lot of reasons. First off is for the health of the tree. Does anybody have any idea what's going on in this picture at the top left along the sidewalk here? I'm going to jump in and guess what happened to these poor shrubs.
Is it ice melt stuff?
Yeah, I would get that would be my guess. Here's a situation where it's right next to a sidewalk and the ice melt or the salts or whatever it was that they were using to keep the sidewalk clear was impacting those shrubs. One key thing when you're looking at trees or anything else and wondering why something like this is happening is to look at the whole environment around it. Is it right next to a street? Is there a downspout right next to that tree? Or, there's various things in the environment that will impact greatly how that tree or how that shrub is going to do. So this, to me, looks like salts or ice melt. What's going on here in the center?
Emerald ash borer.
That is correct. The emerald ash borer. We are not recommending ashes of any kind at this point. This is really a shame because they are beautiful trees and there are very many of them. And the ash borer is just going to send them the way of the chestnut, which is truly unfortunate. Down here is a dogwood. Do we know what's going on with this poor, sad dogwood flowers? This is the dogwood anthracnose, and it's a fungal disease that will attack the dogwoods. Some do better than others. You can kind of mitigate for this by being careful about where you plant your dogwood tree, and we'll talk a little bit about that. I'll bet everybody knows what this delightful creature is up at the top right. Spotted lanternfly. Yes. Now this one, I'm all for letting it just kind of attack the tree of heaven, which is a horrible, and probably the most invasive tree that we have. but that is the host plant for the spotted lanternfly. So it is probably just creating more of them as we go along. And I know that Arlington is trying to identify, especially the female trees, to see if we can at least get rid of them on public land and try to reduce the numbers of the spotted lanternfly. And what's going down here in the corner? Other than this dystopian scene. This is just, this is your horrible, I don't know if they're doing construction here, but it's just horrible compacted soil. This tree is way too close to this building. There's all kinds of negatives going on here. So clearly this was not a great place to be planting these young trees. That is for sure. So the health of the tree is probably a primary concern when you're looking at what type of tree to plant in what area. There's also the beauty of the tree. And I know we've all seen this, right? Dominion Power comes in and does its thing. And I don't know. I really keep hoping that they're going to bury these wires, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. This is something that we look at a lot. When people, for the Tree Canopy Fund, for example, when I go out and I'm on a visit because people are like, okay, I want a Tree Canopy Fund tree. Come tell me what would be good here. And if they've got the wires on their side of the street, it really limits the possibilities. If you're on the other side of the street, you've got a lot more options. But as long as all these wires are here, we're going to have to deal with them. And there's really no justification for taking something beautiful like a big oak or something like that and having it near these wires where it's just going to be hacked. So there's the aesthetics of it, and then there's also that it's just not good for the tree. Planned obsolescence. This poor tree, this is actually in Glasgow in Scotland, and I could not believe that they did this. It was kind of amazing. I mean, first of all, you can see all of the damage to the bark here. I'm sure with, car doors and who knows what, slamming into this poor tree. But then it's like you've got these roots and asphalt coming right up to the trunk of the tree. And I wish that I had taken a picture of the long view, because there's absolutely no open ground. It's all sidewalk, asphalt, the street, bricks. How this tree is managing to get any water, I have absolutely no idea. So, especially when we're looking at street trees and planting trees, along in parking lots and those kinds of areas, we really need to look at what does that tree need to survive and how are we going to provide it for them? Because it's not always an easy thing to do. This is Wilson Boulevard, and all of these trees planted in the hell strip between the sidewalk and the road are willow oaks, which are very big trees. And I remember when these were planted, and you can see the girdling roots and these roots coming up, they're going over the sidewalk. They're just kind of struggling to, gain purchase wherever they can. And naturally, the sidewalk is buckling all over the place. So now, we have people who come through once every few years and try to patch up the sidewalk. But this was not a great choice for this particular area. I doubt if Arlington County would do this now, but they did it way back, probably 30 years ago now. This is our favorite tree of heaven, which kind of manages to go into disturbed areas. We want to avoid invasives. We don't ever want to plant invasive trees, period. When we're looking in parks and places like that, we want to identify these and try to get them eradicated, and then go in and plant hopefully native trees, or at a bare minimum, if it's private property, we want to get non-invasive species in there. But one of the reasons that, as you know, that the invasive species are invasive is that they can take advantage of these disturbed soil type situations, get a foothold, and they grow really fast. And the tree of heaven is particularly awful because when it comes down, it will send out roots horizontally. And if you pull it up, you're just breaking off those roots, and then you're going to have two little trees coming up. And it's just a really nightmare situation trying to get rid of that species. Another reason to plant trees is to conserve energy. I'm not going into a whole lot on this, but in this particular diagram, there are evergreens back here that they're using to block winds in the wintertime. If you plant trees in like the southwest corners and around your house, you can shade your house in the summer and reduce your air conditioning bills. So there's a lot of materials out there. Casey Trees in DC has a great site that covers a lot of this stuff with diagrams and things that you can look at if you want to get more into the using trees to conserve energy. All right, what impacts urban trees the most? What would you think is the number one thing? Anyone? Humans. Urban trees have to put up with us and all of with our cars, with our sidewalks, with our houses, with our additions. So it's not enough to know the trees. You also have to know people. So a lot of what we do is talking to people and finding out what they should plant. Now, I don't know why this is taking off on its own instead of letting me click through. So the number one question that you're going to get is going to be, what tree should I plant? And of course, the answer is a crepe myrtle. Yeah, I'm just kidding. We don't push crepe myrtles, especially now that we have this crepe myrtle blight that is going to be wiping out, if not all of them, a great deal of them. But a lot of people, you will find that crepe myrtles is exactly what they think they want. So we have to talk to them and find out what they want and offer other suggestions. The real question is, what do you want from your tree? And if you ever do any tabling at the farmers markets, or you get into these conversations with people, either at the Tree Canopy Fund or through the tree giveaways and that kind of thing, everybody has a different idea of what it is that they want from their tree. And what you're going to suggest is going to depend enormously on what the answer to this question is. So, for example, they want to have something that is just going to be very pretty and have flowers. Sometimes they really want to attract wildlife, birds, squirrels. They want to look out their window and see the birds. They want something that's going to be cheerful in winter. A lot of times it's a lot more utilitarian. They want to shade their patio grill. They want to screen from the street. They want to hide the air conditioner. Sometimes they're looking for a tree that reminds them of their childhood. It's like, we had a tulip tree in my yard when I was growing up, and I just want that, kind of thing, which is certainly understandable. Everybody wants a tree that grows fast. And this is another conversation you need to have with people, because oftentimes the trees that grow the fastest are the ones that are the most brittle and the weakest and will cause the most problems down the road. And so you need to kind of explain that, and maybe talk about maybe some trees that are good that don't grow quite so fast, but will be a whole lot less work in the long run. And probably the one I hear the most is they want something that will not make a mess. And if you start asking, well, what do you mean by a mess? I mean, I've had times where what they really want is a telephone pole. It's like, we don't want leaves dropping. We don't want birds pooping. We don't want pine cones. We don't want seeds. We don't want berries. We don't want any of this. And it's just kind of interesting. I always think that these must be people that grew up in a city in an apartment and really don't have a whole lot of experience with how trees, change and live throughout the season. So that's always kind of interesting. But on the other hand, you're probably not going to suggest that you plant a fruit tree like a persimmon next to a driveway, or the sweet gum. that has those big balls with the spikes on them that they drop all over the place in the fall. You know, that can be a great tree for a backyard kind of area where they can just fall and it's not a problem. But you probably don't want those next to a sidewalk or your driveway. So you need to find out about what their expectations are for those things. All right, this is a Nora Palmatier thing that from ages ago, and she calls it the shark attack syndrome. And every summer when they do the Shark Week on television, and you're getting all the horrible shark stories and people being attacked and all that, and she says, you know, the local news person will go down the line of the cars backed up as they're trying to get into the beach area, and they'll ask her, you know, like, what is your biggest fear? And oftentimes people will say, oh, I'm afraid I'm going to be attacked by a shark. And actually, you know, your chances of getting eaten by a shark are just inconsequential. I mean, they're teensy tiny. You're much more likely to get run over by somebody when you're trying to go to the snack bar to get a Coke, right? So it's just this fear of something because you're seeing it on the news. And it's kind of the same thing with large trees. People get really concerned that a large tree is going to fall in their house. And it does not help when we have these storms. And of course, the first thing you see is a large tree falling on somebody's house. And then, you know, it usually then it does, you'll be driving around over the next few days and you'll see the tree services out there cutting down trees. This is just heartbreaking because many of these trees are perfectly healthy and they are not going to fall on anybody's houses. But it's a real fear, you know, and we have to address that. I think about the best thing that we can do for this is to really encourage people to get an arborist, one that is certified, and to have them come out on, you know, every few years and check that tree and see if are there any branches that are in danger because they've been attacked by a disease or they've gotten broken in a storm that need to be pruned out. But if you take care of your trees, there's really a small likelihood that your tree is going to be creating any kind of large issue for you and create any damage. So this is something that it's kind of a constant, I think, for tree stewards, is trying to encourage people to not just immediately jump to the conclusion that in order to be safe, what they need to do is clear cut their property. Okay, as tree stewards, we don't tell people what to do. We share what we know and we assist them in finding the information that they request, but we are not professional arborists or landscape designers. So we have to kind of make sure that we let people know and that we are volunteers and we've had some training and we love to talk to them about their trees and we can share with them everything that we know. But when it comes right down to it, you know, they need to bring in the professionals to actually check out their trees and make sure that they are healthy and don't need any work. So I think for something like, especially a large shade tree, encourage folks to take the time to decide. This is really a major commitment. If you plant an oak, hopefully that oak is going to be there for decades. I mean, I know some trees can live, if not centuries. I mean, we live in an urban area, so you're not going to find the state's oldest oak living in an urban area. But they can live for 150, 180 years in a place like Arlington if they are situated in the right place and if they're well cared for. So for something that is potentially going to be in that spot for that long, it makes sense to really do your research and look at your site and really put some thought into making your selection. So they need to look at their site. Where is the sun? Where is the shade? Check how wet it is. Do a soil test. These are all questions that as tree stewards, we're going to take a look at that site and be asking questions about these things so that we can determine what kind of environment do we have here and what kinds of trees are going to do well in that kind of environment. I think it's one of the biggest things for me is like the sun and the water. It's like in the spring, how much sun is this area getting? In the summer, in the fall, it makes a difference. And certainly some trees just do not like to have wet feet. They will just die. Other trees, like our bald cypress and some other ones that we offer on a regular basis, they love having it wet. So, this is important for us to look at, and when we're making our suggestions for people. Look at photos, look at books, internet sites, especially the .edu sites, the Virginia Extension, Maryland Extension, Pennsylvania, all of these EDU sites from the universities are probably the best, as they are have very up-to-date information, and it's the university, so they're not pushing any kind of agenda or trying to sell you anything. So I would encourage people to go out on the internet and look at that. It's also just such a great place to look at photos, so you can actually see what is this tree going to look like in 30 years, 40 years. And you can always visit arboretums. It's better than a nursery. Just looking at, trees that are small, you can see mature specimens. And in Arlington, you can go visit the parks. Master gardeners have a number of demo gardens that have trees in them that, if they have what you're looking for, you can just maybe go to your local park and see what it looks like there. So there's a lot of ways that you can kind of start thinking about, or encouraging people who are asking you to start narrowing down the kinds of trees that they might want to plant in their property. This is important too. Check the dates of the resources. Pre-emerald ash borer, dogwood anthracnose, the spotted lanternfly. We've known about it for a few years, but it hasn't been around all that long. The USDA zones. When I took this training back in 2006, we were zone 7A. Now Kirsten is telling us we're actually 8. Well, I think we're 7B. She's encouraging us to plant, at least for perennials and that kind of thing, zone 8. So we are definitely getting warmer, and this is something that is happening quickly. I'm sure I don't have to tell you, but we seem to be getting more drought. We're getting more extreme heat for long periods. And I think one of the things that is really stressing out our trees is that we lurch from one extreme to the other. So we'll have one season or a few months of pretty severe drought, and then it's like the deluge. We don't get those, every few days we're getting a nice rainstorm that keeps things, moist and nice. No, it seems to be that we lurch from one to the other. And I think it's hard to say how all of this is impacting the trees, but I don't believe it can possibly be good. And I think this is one of these things that we're going to be learning more about in the years to come, as we see how all of these changes to our climate are impacting our environment. And the other thing is that our invasive knowledge has increased. So I think that probably 20, 30 years ago, it was like you get a pretty new tree, Bradford pear comes to mind, and all of a sudden it's everywhere and people are excited. I think that we have been burned enough with new trees, new plants that have turned out to be invasives and just turned around and really damaged our environment, that we're a little more skeptical, I would hope. And we have more knowledge about how invasives actually can operate in the environment and how they can take over areas. And so hopefully we're going to be a little more on the ball when it comes to identifying invasives and doing something about it. Height and width. In our jurisdictions, we typically have very limited space. If you're talking single family homes, they're just not very big lots. So you have to see how much space do we have. Sometimes, I mean, I know for the Tree Canopy Fund, we have been, there's a part of it called the Tree Equity Tree Equity Canopy Fund, something like that. But really pushing for getting trees into areas that have less tree canopy. And a lot of that is apartment complexes and condo complexes and that kind of thing. And that actually is a much easier sell, because if you go to these places, they actually have some space where you can put some large shade trees. You still have to talk the management into letting you do it, but at least there is the space there, and there's the potential to plant trees and have them be very happy. But your single family homes, it can be really difficult when you're looking at them to just find a suitable spot for a tree of any sort. So we already talked about the overhead lines, which are a real problem. There's pavement, there's sidewalks, there's buildings. I mean, maybe a redbud would fit, or a dogwood, but not a white oak. That kind of thing. Oftentimes you'll find somebody and they will have a nice front yard where you could fit in a white oak, and they want a dogwood, and I will find myself trying to, have a conversation where maybe they would consider having a large shade tree because they do have the space. Once again, Casey Trees and the utility companies also have right tree, right place information, and they are a good resource. Okay, so if you go out to a home, and the first thing you're going to do when you're trying to figure out what type of tree would be suitable, you're going to look at where are the utility wires, 10 to 15 feet from the main wires, 10 feet for small trees, 15 to 20 feet for big trees. You don't want anything underneath the connectors. Sometimes it's like Arlington County, you're saying, we don't really care about that one. Use your judgment on that. I think that's really something that the homeowner should know, that it's a risk that your cable box or whatever could go out if if this or your internet, if something happens with this tree. But Dominion, for those small wires that are coming into the house, Dominion is not likely to be coming in and mutilating your trees, but they certainly will for the big lines that are out by the sidewalk. Trees need to be 10 feet from a building, and they also need to be 3 to 5 feet, I would say 5 feet, from the utilities, the pavement, and the fences. So a lot of times when you're looking at this and you measure 10 feet from a building and you measure, 5 feet from a sidewalk, there really isn't a whole lot of space left for you to plant a tree. So you also need to not plant trees right next to each other. So you've got 10 feet from small trees and 20 feet from large trees. Mary, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. Thanks, Kate. And this is coming up personally. I have a great location where I had a tree die, and so we had to, but we didn't really take it out. It still has the root structure. In that case, is it worth trying to remove the roots if you really want? It's a great location for an oak, and I had like the gold dust bush or something like that there that was non-native and died after one of the cold snaps. Is it worth trying to get rid of the roots or doing something to make that site available for good native trees?
Yes. I mean, there's a couple of things that you can do. If you have a good sized tree and it just dies and you need to get rid of it, one thing you can do is you can cut it down, you can grind the stump, and then I don't think you have to remove all the roots. If they grind the stump out and you give it a year, the roots will start to decompose themselves. So for example, for Tree Canopy Fund, we will not plant right next to a tree that you just took down for at least a year, because it's just too hard to dig. But I think if you grind that stump out and give it a little bit of time, then once you can actually get in there and dig so that you can plant it, you can probably you could go ahead and just plant another tree there. The other thing, and people usually don't like to do this except for like the master naturalists, right, is that you can leave the snag. So if it's in a safe place, you can leave the snag for the woodpeckers and, all of the birds that use the dead trees. So that's another option. If if you've got a tree that is in a spot and you're like, okay, I'm just going to be really environmentally friendly here and let nature take its course. But I think that you can certainly plant a tree, at least if not in exactly the same spot, fairly close.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess so. So yeah, if you give it a year, probably 2 to 3, the roots will have died and decomposed. That site might be usable, if not exactly on the same spot, but within some
Right.
reasonable distance of it.
Right, right. And the reason I say, and maybe, I don't know, I would grind the stump just because if you don't, sprouts will usually start coming up from the stump. And that is going to keep everything alive. Whereas if you take care of that so that it's really dead, then it's going to start to decompose and you'll get where you'll get to a point where you can replant.
Well, I hope this isn't digressing a bit, but yeah, I had a big oak come down in the corner of my yard. If I do start getting volunteers up, is it worthwhile to let them, it was a beautiful oak tree. Should I let them continue, or is it better to just cut them off and cut my losses, so to speak?
It's really kind of interesting. And this actually does answer your question. If you go out to, say, Prince William Forest, and you start seeing this happens, you see it a lot with chestnut oaks out there. And all of a sudden you're seeing what looks like 2-trunked chestnut oaks, but they're not. They were logged.
Yeah.
And they sprouted, and you had 2 sprouts that came up, and it's been so many decades now that it actually looks like this was just a double trunk chestnut oak. So I would really talk to an arborist about that. I mean, I've actually seen where you're out like in a forest and it's like, we know this tree was logged because they do not grow like this naturally. But this is what happened. They're cut down and then they resprout. But that's a good idea for something in your yard. And it may depend on the type of oak, whether they respond well to that kind of treatment or not. I don't know, but that's a really interesting question.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I wish I had an answer. If we find an answer, somebody has to let me know because that's good.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. All right. So any other questions about the starting criteria on all of this? No. Okay. All right. So first, overhead wires. And this is what I love about Arlington, because I can stand in my front yard, which is what I'm doing here, and I can practically take every picture of why it's so hard to plant trees sometimes. So these are the wires across the street on Wilson Boulevard, and you can see there's this beautiful, I don't really even know what this is. It's some type of evergreen. I know it's not native, but it's a lovely tree. And every year or two, the utility company is out, hacking away at that tree to keep it away from the wires. And you can't see it, but further down here, there's a whole bunch of sycamores and sassafras and other things. And they are constantly going down the entire hill and chopping these trees back because they're right next to the wires. So we want to avoid this. I mean, it's bad enough with the trees that exist there. We don't want to be adding anything to it. This I just find to be, it's even worse now with all of the extra wires hanging out here. And it just seems to me, not only is it ugly, but it would be so great if we could kind of figure out a way to underground these things so that they are not interfering with all of our tree planting activities. But anyway, that's just me. There's also the available space. So here we have this little house and we have 2 trees, which are kind of covering it right up. One of the things that you might consider when you're looking at especially smaller houses with smaller yards, and you think, oh, I don't have room for a big tree. How about a small tree? But you can see here that with our small trees, because they are not so high, they can still be quite wide. But the canopy is going to be right in front of the windows. And it's almost like I would throw out that it would probably be better if you weren't going for that screening effect to have a taller tree with a higher canopy where you would still get the shade, but you would be able to see out your windows. So just, the kind of thing to consider there. Sometimes the small trees, if they have to be right up next to the house, if you think about what they're actually going to look like, it could just block all of the natural light out of the house. And that may not be what the homeowner is looking for. And in fact, a taller tree with a higher canopy, like a persimmon or something like that, might actually be a better choice for them. Over here, we are seeing, once again, our trees right next to the sidewalk. This is just a very difficult spot. So if anybody wanted to plant anything around here, certainly the hill strip is just very difficult. It's all compacted soil. It's not wide enough really for any trees. And we've got all of these trees over here, and there's construction going on, and we just really don't want to subject any tree to this. All right, who knows what this is? What this tree is? It's a native of Virginia, even though this is someplace in England.
Magnolia grandiflora.
Yes, it is. And they exfoliate this thing in some Victorian mansion. And I was just kind of blown away by this. And the reason I include it is because we're saying certainly for a tree the size of a Magnolia grandiflora, which is our southern magnolia, that would have to be, at least 10 feet, if not more, from a building, certainly probably more than that from a building, because it's just a massive tree. But here we are, and they have decided to exfoliate it. So they have it right up next to the building. So if this is what somebody has in mind, then I guess you can do it. But I have not seen this anyplace else. But there's always the exception to the rule, and I just kind of threw this in here. Okay, this is, of course, really important, and probably where you can really, really provide a lot of insight to the people that you're trying to help pick a tree. It's the light, the water, the soil. So one of the first things is the sunlight. Some trees really need to have full sun, or they're just not going to be very happy. A lot of trees they would prefer full sun, but they can take some shade, which is kind of nice, but they won't grow quite as fast. So you have to know what the light conditions are. There are trees, mostly understory trees, which actually have to have some shade. If you stick them out in full sun, they're going to be stressed out. Dogwoods come to mind. There are others that you just, they much prefer to have some kind of shade. So if they are too much in the sun and they don't have enough water, you wind up with a situation like this where your leaves are just going to desiccate and get brown and fall off. And that is not making for a happy tree. Another thing is compact soil. This is one of the biggest issues in urban environments. And so much of our soil, it's being walked on, sometimes it's being driven on. You've got bicycles, we've got the scooters, we've got all kinds of things happening. Oftentimes the trees don't have a really huge space to begin with. I'm sure you've covered this, but when the soil gets compacted, there is no room for the water, for the air, to get to the roots, to help those roots develop and be healthy and actually bring the nutrients that the tree needs to survive and grow. So it's kind of the kiss of death for a lot of trees. This is why when we look at these construction sites, and it always kind of just, it's just so obvious. Like the site will be clear cut. They'll leave one decent sized tree and they'll do all their construction. And then that tree dies and they take it down. It's kind of like, we're preserving this tree. And it's just not, because they've got cinder blocks piled around it. Now, if Arlington gets in there, if the forestry staff get in there and they review the site and they say you have to save this tree, they will do things, and they will identify the critical root zone. They will put fencing up around it. You know, there are many things that you can do to minimize the impact of construction on trees. But when you're first just planting trees, if it's an area that is going to have a high danger of having compacted soil, then this is going to limit your options. There's a few trees that actually can survive in those kinds of environments, and you should probably stick to those. And if you can avoid that spot altogether. But this is, I think, a really good example of this type of thing, because we've all seen it. The other thing is the water issue. All right, here's our bald cypress, which we were just giving away at the tree giveaway today. And of course, they can thrive, and their natural habitat is often just standing water. So having lots of water is not going to phase your bald cypress in the least. We have a number of other trees that we commonly offer through these programs, like river birch, willow oaks. These are trees, the swamp magnolia, the sweet bay magnolia. They all can handle being in moist, if not wet conditions. So those are good trees for those areas. Trees that are more upland trees and do not like wet feet, if you're going to plant them in a place like at the bottom of a hill where all the rain tends to flow down and stagnate, you're going to have a real problem and they're not going to do well. So you need to know how your tree responds to water before you make any suggestions on that. And third, this is just another, great example of compacted soil and not enough of it. So more and more soil is what we need. We also need to look at the environment. Some trees just do not do well with urban pollution. They just don't. So the more cars, especially like your street trees, you need to find trees that can handle the car exhaust. You need to find trees that can handle at least some of the salts and the different things that, we use to keep our roads clear in the winter time. All of that. So that's, if it's a tree that's sensitive to those things, you don't want to turn them into street trees. This is actually at Virginia Tech, and I didn't even really notice it at once. But apparently there was some kind of fence or some post or something here, and this tree just grew around it. And I've seen this a few times, but generally speaking, you do not want to plant a tree that is going to be forced to eat a fence or something before, in order to survive. So while some trees manage to do it, we want to stay away from things like that are going to girdle the tree or do something else to damage the bark and get into that cambium layer so that they have a hard time bringing the nutrients up to the branches. And of course, and we have a huge problem here as well, our deer population. I don't know what to, so far it seems like the only thing you can really do for the deer is to cage your trees. And I took these pictures not just for the deer, but also because of these rather elaborate caging systems that they had going at this place. We need to have the deer guards in the spring or in the late winter. The young bucks go out and they want to scrape the fuzz off of their antlers. And so trees that have 1, 2, 3 inch caliper, smaller trees, they love those, and they rub their antlers against them and they rub the bark off, and this creates a huge gash in the tree and will very often kill it. Even if it doesn't kill the tree, it's a huge wound, and it takes the tree a long time to recover from that. So as tree stewards, one of the things that you will probably find yourself doing a number of times a year is going out and putting tree guards on trees in the parks, and then going and checking them and taking them off when the tree gets big enough so that this is no longer a concern. Deer will also eat the branches and the twigs on trees, so we cage them for that as well. We can't cage every tree in the park, but we're trying to do the best we can. The parks are one thing. If you talking to your neighbor or you're sent out to talk to somebody about planting a tree on their property, this is a really important thing if they have deer in their neighborhood to talk to them about. We always give for the Tree Canopy Fund those green gator bags, and those will protect the tree somewhat when it's very young. But when those things come off, it's a really good idea to have some other kind of guard to protect that tree from deer. I mean, rabbits and other rodents and things like that can also attack trees, but the deer, I think, are probably the biggest issue right now. Okay, so things to talk about with your homeowner: the size, how big of a tree do they want? Do they have the space for it? The growth factors. Do they want something that is going to grow slowly? Do they want something that's going to grow fast? Form and character. What are they looking for? Do they want evergreen? Do they want something that has a big wide canopy? That type of thing. Leaves, flowers, fruit, bark, and of course, availability. Other big factors are on the maintenance side: watering needs, drought tolerance. Most trees, we recommend that you water them for 2 years. They should get at least an inch of water a week. After that, most trees that are native to this area will be okay and on their own, unless we end up in some kind of, bad drought situation like we've had this year, in which case you should start watering your trees again. The preferred situation: are they on a slope? Are they at the bottom of a steep hill? What does this mean in terms of the water situation? Resistance to pests and diseases. Do they have deer? That type of thing. Pruning requirements. Mess. You've got sweet gum and mulberry. I mean, some trees are just known for, dropping a lot of stuff. A lot of people don't care, but a lot of people do. So it's a good thing to discuss. And then special considerations like the air pollution, the deer, and so forth. Any questions on any of that? Okay.
Kate?
Okay. Yes.
Mary had a question earlier about whether anthracnose can survive the winter.
Oh, I don't know. I would suspect that it could, but I will research that and get back to you.
Hi, this is Debbie.
Hi.
I did a paper on anthracnose, and so unfortunately the answer is yes. And so you do have to clean up around your tree. And then if you're treating it, you really should treat it in the early spring, precisely for those spores that have overwintered.
Yeah, and don't throw it in your compost.
Absolutely not.
Bag it up.
Clean up around the tree. Anything diseased never goes in your compost.
Right.
Right.
Well, thank you both. And Debbie, I've got a dogwood that I think is ailing. About what time of early spring should I bring out an arborist to make sure? Are we talking about early March, or do you have a sense for what time frame I should be looking at getting some help with that?
Yeah, in fact, I just put on my calendar as we were listening to this, a reminder to treat my tree. I put my reminder at the end of February. Dogwoods start blooming, they're one of the first ones. Those brats come out. And so yeah, early March, absolutely.
Yeah. And sorry I hope I'm not digressing too much. So
No, go ahead.
The treatment for the anthracnose, that's something that an individual homeowner can apply, or is that something I need to contract somebody like Save a Tree or something else to do?
Well, I do it.
Okay,
I talked with a professor of mine, and then I went to the plant clinic at Merrifield, and they recommend something. And it's one of those things, if you don't mind dealing with it, you attach it to your hose and you spray it yourself. And you can spray it from your hose. And I started, I think last year, and I think my dogwoods are doing better. But I'm not 100% sure. I try to get underneath, I try and get above, I try and get the trunk. So I think a reasonably knowledgeable person can do it, but again, like anything else, but don't just get, the average landscape guy going around,
Right.
that, of course.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, but I found it, I think it's doable. Talk to me in another year. I think my dogwoods are doing better.
Yeah.
Just when I see less dieback and the health of the leaves and the picture Kate showed earlier. We'll see in the spring if I see that. I think they're better.
Yeah.
So that's what I have to say about that.
So good. So I think, to bring it on backward to this discussion. So I guess when you're talking to a homeowner, if they raise these kinds of concerns, are a lot of these things like the anthracnose, that homeowners themselves are able to treat, so that they shouldn't necessarily be dissuaded from, some of our more keystone native trees then?
Well, maybe. I mean, I think it all boils down to the homeowner and us, as has been said multiple times, among this group, I can say what I said, but to a homeowner, I might be more cautious of saying, well, just go ahead and do it yourself, so.
Yeah.
Is that where the advice to say, talk to an arborist comes into play more?
I would say talk to an arborist. Another option for something like that is to call the extension
Okay.
service and hear what they have to say about it, because it varies widely on what you're trying to do. I mean, if your tree is really big, I had hemlocks that were very tall and very skinny and covered in woolly adelgid. And the same thing, I had the same thing with the scale and sooty mold on hollies. And the issue with both of those was that the solution for those were horticultural oil that had to be applied at a specific time. And I can't remember what it is right. But, but for the scale and all that had to be done, these weeks and this time of thing. But the trees were so big that there was no way that I could possibly do this myself, because you'd need some kind of equipment. So, it's kind of like if you have a small specimen, a little tree, like maybe you got at the tree giveaway, or, even one from Tree Canopy Fund, you maybe, if you're comfortable dealing with some of these things and they're on the shelf and feel like, you've talked and you know what you're doing, you can do it. As trees get bigger and bigger, it becomes harder and harder to deal with. I mean, just because you don't have the equipment and the trees are big. So I would really recommend that people talk to an arborist or at least the extension service and find out, like, how horticultural oil is one thing. Some of the things that they use for some pests are highly toxic and are probably not a good idea for, your average homeowner to be fooling around with. So that's my opinion on that. The thing is, with the trees like dogwoods and some others, it's kind of like, if you love dogwoods, you should plant it. I honestly think the best thing you can do is cleaning up around the tree and bagging it and getting rid of it, and then letting the tree see if it can just handle it, go the next spring and see how it does. Because if you have to be spraying something every year, you'd have to really, really love that tree And some people do that. I mean, there's a champion ash tree in Lyon Park, and it gets treated and by an arborist because it has to, and it's an important tree for that. But would I recommend that anybody plant an ash right now? Absolutely not. I think we have to be realistic that as things are changing, and they're changing quickly, as we get more pests, as we get more diseases, as we get more bad reactions just to the weather and to the climate, a lot of this is just going to be a whole lot of observation and being open to what trees are going to do well and what trees aren't. Casey Trees, and I have to find this thing. They came out with this list of trees that they're based on what they've been doing. That they had 3 categories, and it was keep planting these the way you have, plant more of these and plant fewer of these. And I believe dogwood was on the plant fewer of these list, which just kind of breaks your heart because I mean, it's our state tree and our state flower, and everybody loves dogwoods, but they're getting to be a little problematic. The other thing to do, at least as far as dogwoods go, is there are anthracnose resistant trees. And one is called, the one that I always remember is Appalachian Spring. And that one, it was a naturally occurring, it was like they found it at Camp David. It was a naturally occurring dogwood that seems to be and has shown itself to be resistant to anthracnose. So if I were going to be planting a dogwood, I would be looking for that one. And there may very well be other ones on the market now. Does that help?
Kate, may I add to your comments? I really like what you said about not getting into the routine of treating a tree every year. I mean, that if you have a really special tree, maybe yes. But for the most part, I find with dogwoods, finding an anthracnose resistant tree, or just generally putting a dogwood where it's going to have airflow through it, where it's not going to be in sun and grow too thick and have reduced airflow because of that. So on the woods, on a hill where the wind blows, I've had very good success with just normal dogwoods, Cornish, Florida. It's unfortunate when you have a dogwood that is being attacked by anthracnose, but I think it's partly, that's just one example of all the different stresses that we have on trees. Trees can naturally fight off diseases, but when they're stressed, when they're in sun, when they're crowded with branches, when they don't have enough airflow, a dogwood is much more susceptible to anthracnose. Yeah. So looking for the right place for that tree is critical.
Yeah.
Back to your
absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. And I remember a number of years ago, it was kind of like, because of anthracnose, some people were recommending that you plant them in full sun, which is not what that is not the habitat that dogwoods want. And, those trees didn't do well either, although it may have slowed down some anthracnose, I don't know. But I totally concur with what Scott was saying about, if you find the right habitat for the tree, they are going to be less stressed, and the chances that they can go ahead and fight off any diseases themselves naturally with things like, just good hygiene on the part of the taker care are a lot. They'll probably do a whole lot better.
Yeah, can I just come back in, because sure, in any treatment, nobody should recommend any treatment without the full environmental factors situation. And so sure, if you're starting from scratch, you can think about where you're going to put that dogwood. But if you've lived in your house for 25 years and you've had dogwoods, and then a blight comes to our area, of course you do all those things we've talked about, the cleanup, and the trimming. But that dogwood's been there, and you can't like say, okay, well, the prior owner should have put that dogwood somewhere else. But the truth is, the dogwood was doing great for 30 years.
Yeah.
So the treatment is something you have to do a treatment totally in the context of the environmental factors, and you try the treatment for a focused period of time, and then the hope is that the combination of that has given the tree the ability to then take off on its own. So a year or 3 seasons of treatment, a season being 6 months, and then you stop. It doesn't, I wouldn't, I never started off thinking I'd be treating my tree with anything. But again, this came off, I discussed this with my professor in my arboriculture class, and a little bit of, you try it. But
Yeah.
then you do all those sanitation things absolutely in combination.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would say before you start, using toxic chemicals is, as Debbie did with, she was talking to the experts, is at least check in with extension or with an arborist or something like that to make sure that you know what you're getting into. You don't want to be spraying something that may end up having adverse impacts on anything else that is around, or that you end up poisoning yourself somehow because you weren't sure on the correct way to apply it. So, all right, so that's that. But actually, Debbie, you brought up something that's kind of interesting too. When we're looking at these trees, a lot of your understory trees, dogwoods, redbuds, serviceberries, these trees do not have particularly long life. If they're 30 years old, that is a pretty old dogwood. I happen to have one that I think is like 40 to 45 years old, and it keeps chugging along, and I'm kind of amazed. But if you look up dogwoods and those understory trees, they kind of they come up, but they're not like your oaks where they're going to be lasting for, decade after decade. So, if you are looking at an older tree, or if you're looking at planting a new understory tree, and kind of keep in mind that this is what the lifespan is of that tree, so that you kind of know what to expect as well. Okay, are we good? Ready to move on?
Kate, it's Noreen. I just have
Yeah.
one quick thing, and then I'll let you
Yep.
move on. I was just going to say, kind of tying into our previous class about biodiversity and so forth. But if you buy, you can buy dogwoods at a place like Earth Sangha, where they grow them from seed that's collected in the wild. And those trees are going to have more genetic diversity than the ones that you buy at the nursery. And it's possible that they'll be more resistant to disease because, they just have more genetic diversity. Okay.
Yeah, no,
all I wanted to say.
that's a great point on all of these trees, actually. Yeah, thanks, Noreen. Okay, this next little section I kind of put together because I was getting a lot of different questions, and it's not like we don't really have answers to them. We don't really know what all of the answers are going to be at this point. So this is kind of my disclaimer of, here's where I've landed on this for right now. I may very well change my mind. I expect I will on some of these things as new information becomes available. But I think as tree stewards, one of the fun things is that there is so much that we don't know. Just when you think about the mycorrhizal fungi that connects trees, between the tree roots and in the forest and all of this. I mean, it's like there is so much that we don't know about trees. And, in the years that I've been a tree steward and reading articles and getting continuing education and all the rest, it is just fascinating to me how we keep finding out new things. And sometimes stuff that we thought this is the best way to do it. And it's kind of like, maybe that's not. Maybe we need to be doing this instead because now we have more information. So as you go through these classes, you are learning where, probably the best information that we have to this point, but it is going to change. And I think it's to me, it's one of the most interesting things is that it does change and there's always something new and exciting to learn about. So you can't get too attached to all of your convictions, I guess is what I'm saying. So one of the big questions is always about native versus non-native. And where I come down on this, and I think probably a lot of people who have been through, master naturalists or any of these other type educational programs, native is, I think, always going to be the first choice. It supports an entire ecosystem. Native trees, especially, provide so much in terms of ecosystem services to all of the insects, the animals, other plants. They are usually the biggest thing around and they have a huge impact. So for example, your white oak is hands down the one tree that provides the most caterpillars for birds to eat. I mean, it just supports an incredible amount of insect life and therefore bird life, to say nothing of getting into the squirrels and the bats and all the rest of it. So the oaks are a keystone species for us, but all of our native trees, some more than others, but all of them are going to be providing some kind of pollen for the bees, nectar for the hummingbirds, leaves for caterpillars to chew on, homes for birds. It's like they're all supporting something and they're all very important. And a lot of our insects and our birds and everything, they have very limited, if these plants don't exist, their food doesn't exist, and that's going to be the end of that. So the more you get into studying the importance of natives, the more convinced you will be, and I don't think this is going to change, that planting natives is definitely the way to go. Doug Tallamy, who is an entomologist at the University of Delaware, and he writes a number of books that are very readable. I recommend them. And actually, he speaks on a regular basis, I think. So one of the things that he's come out and said is that if 70% of an area is planted in native plants, then it is a healthy ecosystem. So he's not saying that you have to dig up grandma's peonies or that, every single plant has to be native. But if at least 70% is, then that seems to be kind of like the cutoff point for where you're actually being a diverse biological ecosystem that is supporting all of the native flora and fauna. So that's that. Saying that, non-invasive non-natives are not necessarily terrible, and they may be the only option for a specific need. And I have a specific example for this. One of the things that people, including myself, had wanted was looking for a native tree or that was evergreen that would screen, say, the side of my property from my neighbor's driveway. I mean, so you need something that is narrow, that is going to do that screening function and be able to thrive in that kind of environment. And it happens that while we have incredible biodiversity in this area, we are not big on evergreens. I mean, you've got your American holly, you've got some laurels, you've got probably the best one for what I just described is your Eastern arborvitae. The problem with that is that deer love it. So if you, like me, once again, and like many of us in Arlington, have herds of deer swarming around, chomping on everything, you're not going to have that screening because they are probably going to be eating all of that, all those twigs and branches up as high as they can. So in a situation like that, putting in something like a camellia to provide that screening, it's not invasive. It's not going to really provide much of anything in terms of wildlife, but it's not going to really hurt anything either. So that is so that's not a terrible choice. If you just absolutely love a saucer magnolia because that is what you had in your yard growing up and you just have to have one, you can have that and plant natives, elsewhere. But it's all kind of a trade-off. So these are things that you kind of need to think about. Invasives, on the other hand, and I say are discouraged nicely because I'm a tree steward and that's what we're supposed to say, but really try to discourage the natives. You can't demand that people not plant something if they have their heart set on it, but nobody should be planting ivy right now. We have too much information and too many good horror stories to tell that I would hope that we could nicely convince people to look at alternatives to these invasives. So here we go. So your white oak, yay, do it. That is awesome. It is going to support everything. Saucer magnolia, well, it's a meh tree. Boo is our Bradford pear, which contrary to the way they advertised it, is actually invasive as all get out. And then on top of it is very brittle and has a tendency to break, just split in storms and create all kinds of issues. So here are some of the top invasive trees in Arlington. I'm sure you'll recognize a lot of these. Some of these you might be a little surprised to see on this. A lot of them you'll notice, practically all, well, actually, yeah, most of them are not native. Although I can't think of trees off the top of my head, native trees that are invasive. We certainly do have some native plants in the area that I would classify in the invasive category, in the sense that they will just take over an area and make it impossible for anything else to grow. But for the most part, your invasives are just about all non-native. Asian, European, but sometimes from other areas of North America. So be on the lookout for these. If somebody has one of these, if somebody has a I have to admit, I had a Japanese maple, which I thought was just gorgeous. And I was so sad when it died, but I will be replacing it with a sourwood. So, it's kind of like, as these things go, if people aren't willing to just get rid of them straight out, well, when they die, then let's encourage people to plant a native in their place and at least move things in the right direction. Leland cypress, there's a couple dishonorable mentions here. This is Ashlawn Elementary School, and a number of years ago, they redid the parking lot, and this is this big, tall retaining wall, and they planted little Leland cypress, and they did it so you had a Leland cypress, a red maple, or maybe it was a sugar maple, I'm not sure, kind of like 1, 2, 1, 2 all the way down. And Leland cypress grow very, very fast, and they just ate the maples. So for about 2 or 3 years, it was really kind of pretty along there. And then now we have nothing but these big, huge Leland cypress. And so over here, against my recommendations, we had Leland cypress. And I said, look, this is across the street. I said, look at these. This is what's going to happen. And people plant Leland cypress because they want that screening and they want something that's going to grow fast. The problem with Leland cypress is it does grow very fast, but it's huge and it's not appropriate for most of our smaller yards. On top of that, as it gets taller, the top branches shade out the bottom branches, and those bottom branches then will just die off. So in the end, you end up not having that screening anyway, because your lower branches are all dead and will fall off. So there's really, this is, one of these trees that is beloved by developers and landscaping contractors because you get the immediate impact, but is a disaster in the long run and costs a small fortune, if you then have to go in 15 years later and cut all these things down. So I would not recommend a Leland cypress to anybody. Silver maple and box elder. Silver maple, as you probably know, was really popular after Dutch elm disease because it was another tree that would grow quickly. It would provide a lot of shade. You know, it was a great street tree. The problem is, like many of these trees that grow quickly, the silver maple was brittle. It tends to drop branches, and it is not recommended. We still have quite a few silver maples around from when they were being planted all over the place back in the, you know, earlier decades of the 20th century. But I would not replace anything with a silver maple. I wouldn't plant it, and I would never replace a silver maple with a silver maple. I would pick something else. The box elder is native, but it is brittle. It's actually in the maple family. It is brittle, it suckers a lot, seeds heavily, and you get a lot of bugs, you know, box elder bugs and some different pests with that. I see box elder out in parks where it's totally fine, but it's a real kind of a mess, and it's not something I would recommend for like a homeowner's property, just because you'll be pulling out the seedlings and dealing with a lot of breakage and all the rest of it. Lombardy poplar is, occasionally you'll see these. It's one of these, it's a tall kind of comes up. I always think of those Italian landscape paintings where you have these tall cypresses coming up. And I'm sure that, you know, they were popular because of that shape. But this tree seems to attract pretty much every disease and pest out there. And so for that reason, it is on our dishonorable mentions list. And it also gets, like, for example, a whole lot of cankers and everything else, and it tends to just die off, you know, when it gets hit with these things. So if somebody comes to you and is looking for a Leland cypress or something, or a silver maple or a Lombardy poplar, I would make an attempt to talk them out of those. Okay, climate change, which is kind of like the big question. People are like, what about climate change? You know, what should we plant? And gosh, a long time ago, when we were first talking about all of this, the National Wildlife Federation I went to a symposium that they did, and they're kind of, you know, when it was all said and done, they were recommended that we just kind of plant whatever is in the next zone. You know, look at what's happening in North Carolina and plant that. The problem with that is that while we're hotter and sometimes drier, sometimes we're getting that feast and famine thing with the water going. And yet at the same time, we may have very mild winters, but then we'll get hit with these, you know, polar vortexes or something. So, you know, it seems to me that what's actually happening is, whether we're talking about drought, flood, or if we're talking about heat, cold, the extremes are getting more extreme, and we're getting more of the extremes. So it's not as easy as just saying plant what they have in North Carolina, because while we may be as hot as them, we may also be getting even more cold than we did before. So, you know, that may work or it may not. This is one of those things where, you know, we're really just kind of living the adventure right now and seeing what works and what doesn't. What I am comfortable saying at this point is that I would not recommend trees that are at their southern limit. And by that, I mean trees that, if you look up what zones they grow in, they're like zones 3 to 7. We are like the sugar maple we are at the absolute southern limit for that. And it's only going to get warmer. So the sugar maple was actually on Arlington's recommended list not all that long ago, but they took it out because it's really just too hot now. So there's an example of something that, you know, used to be fine here, was native here, is no longer. I have started looking at trees that have a wide range. So for example, your white oak is, the range is huge. It's like if you lop off the bottom part of Florida and the very top half of Maine, it's pretty much native to everything in between. So I looked it up today. Zone 3B through 8B is the white oak range. I'm comfortable recommending a white oak. You know, as long as it's an upland tree, it doesn't like wet feet, it's got other things that you need to consider. But as far as, you know, the whole climate change, temperature, and what's going on, I think a white oak is probably a pretty good bet. So I would look at the trees that you are considering recommending, and that is just one more thing to look up and consider. Trees where they're like saying that the highest zone is 6 or 7, I would strike them off the list, which doesn't mean that they wouldn't survive, but it seems to me that it would be probably more problematic than some of the others that have a wider range. Okay, so as you go through this class, how can you share your newfound knowledge? Tree canopy fund. Alexandria does not have a tree canopy fund. Arlington does. What tree canopy fund is that developers, when they redevelop a plot, if they have to guarantee that they can plant trees that will provide 20% coverage, canopy coverage in 20 years, or, you know, whatever it is that is true for that particular spot. And that is something that the Arlington Forestry Office does. If they can't do that, then they have to pay into the tree canopy fund. But that money is funneled through Eco Action Arlington, and we can then use it to go out and buy trees and have them planted on private property. So this is just a great program. You're getting a free tree that is probably 6 or 7 feet tall, a decent sized tree, ball and burlapped. It's delivered. It is actually planted in your yard, and you get a gator bag with it. And if it dies within a year, you get a new one. I mean, you really can't beat this. The way you would volunteer with Tree Canopy Fund is you would let Nora know. I think we've got somebody probably on the call tonight who has volunteered. I saw her name earlier and I can't remember. This would be a good time to speak up, because somebody's going to be setting up these visits. So when people email and say, hey, I'd like to have somebody come out and talk to me about what kind of tree I should plant in my yard, then a tree steward will go out, and you can bring your measuring tape and see what's possible there, and look at the list. We always have a list of possible trees, very much like the tree information sheet that I handed out. And, and you can talk to them and help them make a decision about the trees. Another opportunity is like today's tree giveaway. People are coming for their trees. Now, they've already selected them, but you can still talk to them about how to plant, how to care for their tree, and also where they should plant it. I mean, some people knew where they were going to plant that tree, but other people didn't. So you could say, oh, you picked a sweet bay magnolia. This will do fine in a wet spot, that kind of thing. And there's always, throughout the year, there's options of tabling at farmers markets, there's home shows, there's always the county fair. If we have people that are willing to, take our big box of tree knowledge and go spend a few hours, then you can talk to people about all of the good things that are going on. So, and what I always say about this is, how often do people really want your insights and opinions? This is a golden opportunity, and you should seize it. It really is a lot of fun to go out and talk trees with people. If they're asking for the help, then they're excited about finding a tree, and we're always excited about finding a tree for them, and it's just a whole lot of fun. You can meet a lot of good people this way. Now, any questions before we go through just a quick little exercise here? No. Okay, I've got a few pictures. And so if you have your tree information sheet that I sent you, this is really the kind of thing that you would get from the Tree Canopy Fund. And it gives you some information about that tree. So in this particular situation, The owner is looking for a shade tree. They'd like to be able to shade the sidewalk. They want high wildlife value. There's no wires on this side of the street, thank goodness. There is a slope. So what does this tell us about the water situation? Anybody?
Well drained.
Right, right. You're not going to have a lot of water pooling or anything. This is a well-drained site. The house is facing north and it's adjacent to a busy street. So any ideas, just quickly glancing at our tree information sheet or from what you already know, of what kind of tree you might suggest to them? And this person actually did take a tree, so at the end I can tell you what they ended up with.
Well, if they don't have any wires, then I would think we could recommend something fairly tall.
Yes. Yep. I mean, with these pictures, it's hard to tell, but there is a good bit of space there for an Arlington front yard. So you could go with a big shade tree on this one, no question.
And if it's adjacent to a busy street, and with the sidewalk there, I think you'd want something that would have, the canopy would be fairly high, and that would go with a tall tree too.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. I think we're definitely looking at a big shade tree. We want something that has high wildlife value. So,
well, my gut reaction would be an oak, but
yes.
I don't know
I know.
if I'm burying the lead.
No, I think right off the top of my head, the first thing I would think of would be an oak tree, because you've got the space. Oaks have, some of the highest wildlife value that you can get, and it will definitely be able to shade that sidewalk. Now the question is, oh yes, go ahead.
What about like a tulip tree? Couldn't that, I mean, that grows just as big and maybe
It
not
does.
much wildlife benefit, but
tulip trees have less wildlife value. And one of the things with tulip trees is
well, their
that
branches can go out so far they can fall on their house. But
yeah, the problem is that those branches, that is a classic tree. It's a fast grower, but it
gets
shades
hit
out
by
the lower
lightning.
branches and they come down. Now, overlooking a sidewalk, you probably don't want that. Actually, it's kind of funny because this particular person has a tulip tree in their backyard, which is getting to be huge. And it's one of those things where it was like she grew up with one and just had to have it. But it's actually not on the list that Arlington would recommend for being next to houses.
Yeah.
They're great in the parks. And I suppose if you had a big enough yard and you wanted one, it would be fine. But it can be a little problematic.
thank you.
Also,
Yeah.
I have a big one in my backyard that's been there 80 years, and they are very drought sensitive. So they like a deep soil and more moisture. Like when we get to August and September, mine drops its leaves early every year, and you see this in the parks as well. So I would say on an excessively drained site like this, a tulip poplar might volunteer in, and it might do well. It might not. I wouldn't recommend much there because they are drought sensitive. I'd also say that just looking at the wires is one thing, but you're supposed to also call Miss Utility before you dig. Where's the gas line? Where's the water line? What else?
Exactly. Yes. And we do, like, for example, if we see this, light fixture that they've got there, then we would definitely move it, 3 to 5 feet away from that. I should mention for Tree Canopy Fund that as part of the whole process, the contractor that plants the trees also deals with gets Miss Utility out there. So that aspect is taken care of. But if you're doing tree giveaway, or if you're just advising somebody who's going to go buy their own tree, that is I'm glad you brought that up. That's an important thing to remind them, is that before you go planting a tree, you should call Miss Utility and make sure you're not planning on, plopping a tree on top of your gas line or something like that. Yeah. All right. So I think, yes, an oak would be, yep,
Can I jump in on that point? I just,
sure.
I have a white oak.
And
I love it.
Can I throw out another idea?
Oh, I'm
I-
sorry.
I agree.
Well,
I was just gonna
I
ask,
was, I
um,
was talking, but okay.
Let's do one person at a time, okay? In the future, if somebody else is already talking, please go to the bottom of your screen and hit the raise hand, and we will get to you in turn, but let's just have one person talking with Kate at a time, all right? Thank you.
Sure. Can I jump in because I want to stick with the oaks and I think maybe Linda
Yeah.
wanted to get to an alternative. I love my white oak and all the reasons you said, all the habitat. But it does drop an awful lot of acorns. And so I wonder how you deal with that in talking with an owner, just sort of warn them of that. I didn't plant this
Yeah.
one. Obviously, it came with the property. It's really tall, it's really big. But honestly, it's kind of a big chore. And it's loud on my roof. And my neighbors say the same thing. So I don't know how how you handle discussing that other than just saying, look, here's all the benefits, but also know that this is a situation with white oaks and they're every year because they're white oaks. So
Well,
you don't
that's
even
going to be the situation with all oaks. Every tree is going to try to reproduce. And you're right, with oaks, it's going to be acorns. And some people are going to be, I don't want to know, I don't want acorns in my gutters, so I can't have one, next to my house that's going to be creating that situation. It depends. I mean, in an earlier slide, it was kind of like, what's the owner looking for? For those owners that are really clear that they don't want any mess, you're probably going to avoid the things, maybe you'd avoid the oaks, but you would certainly avoid like the sweet gums and some of these other ones, especially anything fruiting that is going to create an issue for them. I think the thing with the oaks is you really just have to talk to people and say, this is it. I mean, people know that oaks have acorns, and you can talk about it and say, some years are mast years and you're going to have a lot of acorns. Other years, are not mast years and you might not have quite as many, but you're always going to have some. That's part of what makes it a great wildlife value tree. So this particular person was very specific that they wanted high wildlife value. So that was not an issue, but it's something that you really do need to bring up and have that discussion with people so they can make that decision and know what they're signing up for. So that's a good point, Debbie. Okay, now who was going to suggest something different? Someone had a different idea for this spot. No?
yes, this
Yes.
is Linda.
Hi.
I was looking through the list and the Nisa sylvatica seems to fit the bill as well. And that would do away with the problem of the acorns, because although it fruits, the fruit is not as loud when it hits your roof. So what, I mean, I do see why an oak is an obvious choice for that site, but is the black gum also a potential?
Yeah. I think it absolutely is. And in fact, the Nissa sylvatica is a really popular tree here. And part of it is because it's got gorgeous red fall color. It is a good wildlife tree. It has these like droops that the birds eat, but it's not acorns or, those balls that the sweet gums drop. So in that sense, it is, less messy. And the other thing about that tree, the black gum, is that it's narrower. So it's like 20 to 30 feet wide, which in a lot of Arlington, when you're dealing with a relatively restrained space, that is a really good choice because it's narrow enough that it'll fit nicely in the yard. So that would be another option. Absolutely. All right. So for this one, I would go actually I would recommend a white oak off our list here. because the white oaks do not like having wet feet. And even though they are a little on the, they're not exactly fast growing, I think it would do fine here. It's full sun. It's not going to have wet feet. It doesn't tolerate soil compaction, but this is just open lawn, and I think it would do great. What they ended up with, and I notice it's not on this list for this time, when we do tree canopy fund, some trees like being planted in spring and some like being planted in fall. So depending on what the season is, you'll have a somewhat different list. And we ended up going with a scarlet oak here. And it's doing quite nicely, I'm happy to say. So that's very good, people. So this is
Kate, may
so
I just
anything
add a
else on this
point?
one? Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned that like a white oak is a slow growing tree, but actually I think that people are too easily typed trees. I think maybe it comes from the nursery industry. They like to have very simple things to say, but I think trees grow at different rates in their lifespan. And I think young trees, even white oaks, grow relatively quickly for several years. Maybe they grow slower as they mature. But
Right.
I remember Doug telling me making this point that he said people nursery people will recommend a maple because they'll say you won't be around to enjoy the tree if you plant a white oak. And he said, no, I planted a white oak and it's grown fine the first 5 years, and I'm enjoying the tree. So yes, a white oak will grow slower, especially as a mature tree. But I think as a young tree, white oaks grow, close to the same rate that other young trees grow.
Oh, okay. All right. That's good to know. I will throw out here that the first year after you plant a tree, it's really focused more on getting its root system established.
Yes.
So you might not see a whole lot happening, but within, after 2 or 3 years, you should, no matter what kind of tree it is, you should definitely be seeing significant new growth on that. So thanks, Scott. I did not know that. All right. So here's another place. We've got high overhead wires, which is always a challenge. You've got a flat area that is falling to a steep slope, and we've got 15 feet between the house and the slope. And the house faces east. So you're looking at morning sun. You really can't plant on that steep slope, but you can get 10 feet away from the house. And you do have those wires. So this one is a bit more of a challenge. And they are also looking to attract wildlife. Any thoughts? I would say the Nyssa sylvatica would do well in this situation as well, because it is narrow and because it's a high wildlife tree, and it can take full sun to part shade. So morning sun is not as strong as afternoon sun, and you've got some other trees around there. So I would say this is probably not a full sun situation, but sunny enough.
Kate, I have a question. It's not
Sure.
from the photo. How far would that wire be from any tree that is planted? Because I had been thinking about an understory or a hornbeam, but is the wire far enough away?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is, because if you look at the wires, and this is the hardest thing when you're doing this for pictures, is the wire is out in the hell strip. So you wouldn't be able to get a really like a large canopy tree in, like a white oak or something like that, because the canopy is going to end up interfering with those wires. I mean, they have like what, 50, some of these trees will get 80 feet wide. So no, that is not an option. But I think if you looked at I think if you've got 15 feet to the top of the slope, you probably have another 12 feet or so, at least, to the wires, if not more. So I would say, yeah.
I'm sorry. I want to second Nora's recommendation. I was also looking at the musclewood, the ironwood, the hornbeam.
Yep. I think that would be an excellent
Because it's
choice
high
as well.
wildlife value, and you said this is the eastern side of the.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really nice tree. And I think that would do very well there as well. Yeah, so some of these smaller trees, which are on page 2, the Austria virginiana, which is the eastern hop hornbeam, your Carpinus caroliniana, and your Nyssa sylvatica are all really good trees for those tight spaces, and especially for when you've got the wires. The bald cypress is relatively narrow, but it can get very, very tall. So, and it also likes wet. Although once it's established, it can do fine, in a situation where it's not, in a wet all the time. But it's a little, because it can get so tall, you might, I think it kind of needs a certain spot that it can really fit in well. But yeah, I think the American hornbeam or the black gum would be a really good choice for here. All right. Anybody else? Okay, this picture, it's a little hard to tell what's going on here, but the area is really in a depression. You can kind of really see it. Here's a driveway up here, and it just kind of on all sides slopes down into this kind of pool type area. There is a willow tree already over here, and there's a crepe myrtle over here, and the Route 66 bypass is right over here, and it's the southwest corner. And they would like to plant a tree in here someplace. So what would you recommend for that?
I mean, if it's is it a wet area down in the depression?
Yeah, I think you can assume that
Yeah.
this is, when we get heavy rain, this is going to be really soggy.
I mean, then in that case, I mean, if they wanted a big tree there, I mean, there's like the cypress, the bald cypress, or the John redwood tree maybe, but the problem with that is it may outcompete the other smaller trees eventually.
Yes, it might. Yeah, well, that's kind of the issue here. So if you were to plant, say, a bald cypress, or say we have willow oak as an option, but also the river birch, the Betula nigra. I mean, I think a river birch could be really, really nice right here, but eventually this is going to shade out your crepe myrtle. So that could be a problem because crepe myrtle's like full sun. Although I have to admit, when I took this picture, this was before we had the crepe myrtle disease that was, felling crepe myrtles all over. And it may be that this homeowner will be like, this thing is on its way out. I'd rather have something bigger in here. And then we could go with a river birch or even a willow oak if they wanted. And another tree, which, once again, I hate to do this to you, but it would be on another season, is the American sycamore, which is another tree that likes wetter conditions. But that's another one that it gets the anthracnose. I mean, I love it, and it can get absolutely massive. So it's a great tree. People like it, and a lot of people will go ahead and get them. But it can be a little bit problematic just because of their size. Yes, Mary.
I recently put in a rain garden, and we did the American hornbeam. Given the
Mhm.
expression there, I don't know whether that would be classified as fall color and interest. I primarily did it for wildlife support, but how would the hornbeam do for the criteria of fall color and winter interest?
Hornbeam's actually a good fall color. I've got down here for yellow, orange, and red fall color. And hornbeams, when you look in the parks and stuff, they tend to like it on the moist side as well. They're always growing next to, 4 Mile Run. So a hornbeam would be another option. I think right here, your big issue here is going to be the crepe myrtle. I would talk to them and say, look, pretty much whatever, we've got a number of options that you can put here. But if they shade out that crepe myrtle, then you're probably going to end up having to get rid of that. But yeah. All right. Anybody else on this one?
I like your idea of the bald cypress,
Yeah.
especially for fall color.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the bald cypress are
I mean,
amazing.
you just have to tell them that the crepe myrtle is,
Yeah.
is
And
its days are numbered.
Yeah. Exactly.
I know bald cypresses would be good there, but a lot of people, like in my neighborhood, in areas where they're now putting dawn redwoods. They seem to be the popular tree now because they're even faster growing, but they look pretty much like a bald cypress and function the same. Because
They do. Yeah.
Is
They
there
do.
any
Well,
disadvantage? I know it's not native for anywhere
Yeah.
here, but is there any negative thing that a dawn redwood could cause? Is it?
Yes,
Not that
one of the
is it?
issues, I'm sorry, I can't
No, go
find
ahead.
my raising hand thing here.
No,
I
go
know
ahead.
it's somewhere, but it's disappeared. But anyway, the one thing I would point out is a dawn redwood is not a bald cypress by the insect's point of view or the birds. So that's, to me, the big issue. It's a lovely tree, but nothing can eat it.
But that's why people like planting it, I guess, too.
Right, they do.
And it can, survive anything almost, it seems like. But
Yeah. Yeah, but I would go with Nora. If it were me, I'd go with the bald cypress because it is native and because it is going to provide those ecological benefits, to wildlife. Okay. I had one thing I want to mention here because this was something that I learned in TreeStewards and I had no idea until I heard it here. And that is all of these trees, like for example, your bald cypress and your American sycamore and the rest of them that really kind of prefer wet conditions. And if you see them in nature, they're usually always in the moist areas. The thing that by having water kind of basically flood them, what that does is create the same kind of conditions that you get with compacted soil. So which means that there's no oxygen in that soil because the water has come in and filled all those little areas where the air would have been. So once these trees are established, they are just tough as nails. So they are often used as street trees. And you're looking and you're saying, why are they planting bald cypress down the middle of Wilson Boulevard in the median strip, for example? Don't they like living in a bog or in a marsh? And the answer is yes, they do. But because of those really tough conditions, if you can get them established, they are really capable of handling those kinds of compaction issues that because they're used to having no oxygen because of the flooding. So they're kind of adapted to that. So oftentimes you'll see these trees that are really have evolved to live in wet conditions, and they can be quite successful in other conditions as well. So I just think that's kind of a fascinating piece of information. Scott, did I see your hand come up? Did you change your mind?
Yes,
Yeah.
I just had one last thought about the distinction between the bald cypress and the dawn redwood.
Yeah.
Two very nice trees. I I'm of the opinion that you don't necessarily have to recommend one tree. You can tell them several trees for their site, and you can make the distinction that, well, the bald cypress will have wildlife value in addition to, you know, the attractiveness of the tree. I just try to give people as much information as possible. I will offer my opinion. I will say, well, you could put a Don Redwood, but I myself would do the bald cypress. But, you know, I'll give it information on several trees for a site. After all, we're providing, like you said earlier in your talk, we're providing information that people can use. And you know, short of, you know, we don't claim to be experts, but we do impart knowledge.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, that's a great point to make, Scott. Thank you. All right. I think I've only got a few more of these, and this one's pretty easy. The owner would like an ash tree. And there's 25 feet between the house and the sidewalk. It's mostly flat. It's full sun. There are no wires. What do we tell them? This is an easy one.
Well, ash trees are wonderful, but because of the ash borer, it may be there 15 years, and when it gets to be big, it could be gone. So right when it's reaching its full potential, it could be invaded. So
Yeah.
Something else.
No ash tree. It's got to be something else. What would you, and actually on this one, pretty much, you could recommend pretty much anything, you know, that, unless it wants shade. But other than that, this is kind of like this homeowner has so many trees they could choose that would do just fine here. So they are very lucky. I would like to put them a nice shade tree over the sidewalk. Would be perfect. All right, this one, and this is the second to the last one, so we're almost done here. The owner wants shade and not much mess. And what you've got here is you've got this little retaining wall, then we have this triangle area, and then we've got this grate, which covers the stream and stormwater overflow. It's full sun, relatively flat, no overhead wires. So what would you recommend for that?
So, Kate, hey, I'm not gonna
Yes.
pick a particular tree because somehow I didn't get your handout, but I'll get it after. But I would just
Okay.
comment here that it doesn't look like you need something that perhaps is not super tall because you've got, you know, the critical root zone of the tree. And it looks to me like this space is, you know, constrained between the grate and the retaining wall. So I think you have to take into account the, you know, the size for the roots. So I'll just throw that idea out.
No, that's a good point. That's a good point. It's not a huge space.
Could maybe a magnolia. I mean, it depends on what type of look they want, but
Like the Sweet Bay magnolia.
just a southern magnolia.
Southern magnolia is really huge.
Okay.
That one would be,
Okay.
and I apologize, it's kind of hard to tell from
Yeah,
this
it's hard to
picture,
tell.
but
Yeah.
that one would be really kind of, I think, too enormous for that area. Now, the last page of the handout, for those of you who managed to get it, were small trees for placing under wires and stuff. And most of these guys are going to want, I just want to make sure you look at those. These are your, you know, your serviceberry, your pawpaw, redbud, dogwood, and your Sweet Bay magnolia, which I think is kind of underused in some cases. That's a really nice tree that likes to have, can handle moist conditions and everything. But in this particular case, they specifically wanted shade and not much mess. Mary.
When I think of magnolia, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think of mess. Are there magnolias that are not messy?
Well, I think your Sweet Bay really does not strike me as being messy. Your southern magnolia, those leaves are so, they never break down, you know? I
Right.
mean, I'm sure they do, but it takes forever. They're very, very stiff. They're pointy. They stab at you when you're trying to rake them up and put them in bags. Your sweet bay magnolia really does hang on to its leaves. And south of here, they're evergreen. Here, usually by the middle of the winter, we'll get one of those big storms that's really windy, and then the leaves come flying off. But the leaves are softer. They will compost, and they don't have it seems to me like you don't get the mess kind of thing that you do with the southern magnolia, which really is evergreen and tends to drop those leaves kind of continuously. All right, so what do we think of? Well, once again, your all-purpose Nyssa sylvatica, I think could do fine there. But maybe a red oak. It doesn't like very wet soil, so that maybe not for that. How about maybe the basswood, your Tilia americana? That might be a possibility. That has nice flowers too, and really attracts a lot of the bees and would provide shade. I think for this one, there really are a lot of options for this. I do agree with Debbie that you probably don't want something that is really huge, just because that space is kind of constrained in terms of providing areas for the roots to go, and you've got that storm grate and everything. But we've got a number of trees on this, either on the large trees and the medium trees that would do fine here. Okay. All right, last one. This owner, and this is right next to a park on the other side of the fence. They would like a row of Bradford pears along the fence to screen the yard from the bike trail in the park. The house sits in a deep depression, so we know that it's going to tend to have water pool there. It's adjacent to park, and there are deer present. There are high and low wires in the area, and the house faces west, so it's getting afternoon sun, and well, the house isn't facing west. The area is getting afternoon sun, so it's kind of a more full sun kind of area. Now, we already know our Bradford pears are a disaster, so we're going to discourage him very, very much on the Bradford pear thing, because they will just invade the park and probably split and just be more hassle than they're worth. So what could we suggest to this guy as opposed to Bradford pears that might make a nice tree-lined hedge along that fence? Linda. Yes, Linda. Oh, your mic is off.
Yes, I'm sorry, I had trouble
That's
with
okay.
my mute. Yeah, okay. I know this isn't on our list, but if they really want a good screening tree that has some deer resistance, the American holly is just a powerhouse.
Mm-hmm. That is a good idea. Yeah, it certainly is. It certainly is. And that would discourage deer from nibbling on that.
Problem with a holly is that it eventually becomes large and would mess with the wires.
Right.
I put in the chat that this is where if they want a screen, this is where I recommend a native evergreen shrub like wax myrtle, which I've seen, which can grow quite high. It doesn't shade as thickly. It doesn't screen as thickly as the what's the obnoxious thing that everybody plants, the fast growing
the Leland cypress.
Yes, it doesn't screen as thickly as that, but it screens pretty well, and it can be trimmed, so, so it can be thicker. it's hard. You know, the trouble with evergreen natives is that they're slower growing, and the owner, when they hear that, they you need to be able to tell the truth, but not necessarily put the plant that you're advocating for in a poor light. So if you emphasize slow growing, the owner's not going to plant it. So
Right.
you watch your words. I don't want to blather on too long, but basically you try to read who you're talking to and adjust what you're saying for that.
Yeah, I think when I did this, does anybody else have any thoughts before
Yeah, I was going to
Yeah.
throw out, you mentioned this earlier, and I would support it maybe here, was the camellias, because
Yeah.
if there was 70% native somewhere else, but it would make a nice screening. And with the park there's probably a lot of other natives around. And one thing I had put in the chat was the thing that I find cool about the camellias. I had a couple of them that were there, but they like flower at this totally off time. So
do.
I mean, I have a couple. I look out my kitchen window in the middle of the winter, and there's like pink flowers on the camellia shrubs, and that's just a hoot. So again, though, you would want to make sure you have an overall balance of you know, if you want to stick to the 70% rule. But I thought go ahead.
Yeah, the only thing that the fact that they're not native, so, you know, I wouldn't, because of that, but also is, I'm afraid this site would be pretty sunny for camellias. Camellias are really shade plants. And if you get them in too much sun, the leaves tend to just kind of fry. But, you know, that is an example of when you get into these really tough situations of, you know, maybe you need to look and consider, you know, not your perfect plant, but something that is actually going to do what you want. I think what I was thinking about here were two, and neither one of them is perfect. One was the Sweet Bay Magnolia, because it is sort of evergreen. And it is not so tall. I'm thinking that it might not interfere with those wires. And it would provide the screening for most of the year. I think it would do all right there. It also could handle the moisture issues. The other one was serviceberry, which would not give you any screening when the leaves are off, but it would give you the white flowers. And since this person wanted Bradford pears, it's kind of like, okay, you know, you're not going to get perfect screening with Bradford pears either. How about if you swapped in the serviceberry for the Bradford pears, and you would still get nice fall color, and you would get the flowers, and you would, you know, as an extra bonus, get the berries that, you know, you could fight over with the birds with. So that, I think, is what I was thinking there. But I hope what you got out of this is that there are, as Scott was saying, there are multiple options for every situation. And, you know, the list that I gave you here was just to kind of give you an idea of, you know, some of the trees that we often offer through the tree giveaway or the tree canopy fund. But we are blessed in this area of having an incredible diversity of native trees and shrubs, many of which are just drop dead gorgeous. And, you know, there really is no excuse for not planting more of these things. I mean, they are really beautiful. And I think that, you know, one of our missions in life as tree stewards is to at least let people know that these options exist, and, you know, that they do provide all these extra ecological services. And because they're native, they're probably going to be easier to care for in many cases. So these are all, so you can all become salesmen for trees, but it really is a lot of fun to talk to people and to help them reach a decision that they're going to be happy with. So I hope you all get a chance to go out and volunteer with some of these programs. I know I've been talking mostly about Arlington because that's what I'm familiar with, but Alexandria does their tree giveaways. And there's a lot of plantings going on in Alexandria and a lot going on there. There are communities that have gotten together and bought trees for their entire community. I'm sure you're going to hear about a lot of these things. And all of these projects require somebody sitting down and trying to figure out, okay, what are the trees that we're going to offer, that we're going to suggest for this? So this is the kind of thing that you get to do pretty much all the time if you're, you know, no matter what project you're working on, if it has to do with trees, and selecting trees, all of these issues are something that you're going to have to consider. So I hope I didn't go, I had no idea how long this was supposed to go on for. So I hope I didn't take too much of your evening. Are there any final questions? No? All right, Lori?
I just want to
Yep.
say you're amazing. You have so much knowledge and you presented so clearly. Such a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any questions later on, I hope you have my email address. And it's just katedonohue11@gmail.com. And just send me an email and I will get back to you. All right.
Thanks.
Great presentation.
All
Kate.
right. All right. Thank you.
Kate. Lots of people in chat thanking you too. We really
Oh,
appreciate
okay. You know, I use Teams so much. I'm not that familiar.
See, you
But,
did it. It worked out fine. You were beautiful.
Okay. All right. Thank you,
All right.
everyone.
Thanks a ton. Everybody have a great evening. See you soon.
Thank you,
Okay.
Kate.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Go Phillies.